I figure out how much yarn I need for a weaving project?
Well, the truth is you're gonna have to do some math. Don't worry, it isn't that bad. Say that you and I decide that we want to weave a woolly scarf similar to the one shown here. Let's plan for a balanced plain weave, meaning there are the same number of warp and weft ends in every inch. We also will plan to use a sport weight wool. If we don't know the set of our yarn, we can use a wraps per inch gauge or a ruler to give us a good estimate. By using this method, it looks like this yarn should create a balanced plain weave with a set of 10. Set is a confusing term. It refers to the spacing of the yarns in the warp and weft. Warp set is called ends per inch, and weft set is called picks per inch. Let's calculate the warp length for a scarf 65 inches long, 4 inches wide, with a 4-inch fringe. Here's where we start the math. The finished length is 65 inches. Now we need to add a bit more for loom waste. Loom waste is the yarn that can't be woven into cloth. It includes the warp that is tied onto the front and back apron rod, and the warp that can't be woven as the back apron rod snugs up against the reed or rigid heddle. You can use the loom waste as fringe. We're going to do this in our project, so we don't need to calculate extra yardage for fringe. Let's plan to weave our scarf on a rigid heddle loom and estimate a loom waste of 18 inches. We also have to add in extra yarn for take-up and shrinkage. This allows for the loss of width and length as the yarns interlace with one another and when the fabric is released from tension on the loom. A general rule of thumb is to allow 10 to 15% for take-up and shrinkage. We are going to allow for 10% and then round up to the nearest whole number. Our warp needs to be 92 inches long to create a finished length of 65 inches. Now let's determine how many warp ends we need. Multiply the warp set by the finished width, in our case that's 4 inches, and then add 10% for take-up and shrinkage. Round up the results, in our case 44.4 inches, for a total of 45 ends to weave our scarf. To determine our total warp yardage, multiply the warp length by the number of ends to get the total yardage in inches. Most yarn is sold by the yard, so we divide this number by 36. We will need 115 yards of yarn for our scarf's warp. Now let's talk about calculating our yardage for the weft. Start by determining the width of your woven warp in the reed or rigid heddle. Previously, we calculated that we needed 45 ends to result in a finished width of 4 inches. That would mean that our width in the reed would measure 4.5 inches in a 10-dent rigid heddle or reed. Okay, stay with me here. Take the width in the reed and multiply that number by the weft set, which is how many weft passes there are in an inch. Then multiply that number by the finished length of the scarf. Keep in mind that you're going to have to weave about 10% more yardage to get your desired finished length. Round up to the nearest number and divide by 36. To weave our scarf, we need 115 yards of warp and 90 yards of weft. When you're just starting out, estimating yardage can seem like such a confusing task. Just take it step by step, and when in doubt, buy a bit more than you need. Feel free to contact one of our friendly staffers with questions. Happy weaving!